Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Scrum at Scale webinar presentation. I'll give everybody about 30 more seconds or so to join. It looks like we have some coming in. All right, excellent. Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Layden, and I'm the product owner of marketing for Scrum at Scale LLC. Before introducing today's speaker, I'd like to briefly cover just a few housekeeping items. So first, to provide everyone with the best listening experience, all audio lines except for the host and the presenter will be muted during the webinar. If you would like to ask the presenter a question, please use the Q&A panel on your console, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. You may also use the chat feature to share comments with other webinar attendees, but please be sure to direct questions for the presenter through the Q&A panel. And please note that we will not be using the raise hand functionality. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to play on demand from both the Scrum at Scale website and the Scrum at Scale YouTube channel within 24 hours. And with that, we are now ready to start today's presentation. I'd like to introduce our host, Simon Roberts. Simon is a certified Scrum at Scale trainer and will lead a 30-minute presentation and host a 15-minute Q&A session. All right, take it away, Simon.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm coming to you from Scotland in the UK, and it's just got dark. If I look outside my window, I can see just see the loch with a few ships going past. So I'm going to talk about product ownership at scale. I'm going to try to relate some of my experiences using Scrum at Scale and also approaches related to Scrum at Scale in a product owner context. First of all, what is Scrum at Scale? It's a joint venture between Scrum Alliance and Scrum Inc. 50% Scrum Alliance, 50% Scrum Inc. They organize and they are the people who certify people as practitioners, and they also organize train the trainer sessions every quarter in the US and Europe. You can find out more about that using the links that are available in this slide set. Something about me. I've been using what became Agile methods since about 1999. Back then I met Martin Fowler at the Java 1 conference in San Francisco, and he told me about this thing called extreme programming, and I've been hooked, if you like, ever since. And I've been helping organizations since the early 2000s to use Agile methods. I'm a certified Scrum trainer from Scrum Alliance and also a Scrum at Scale trainer. I like to sail. I lived for a long time in Berlin. I'm currently living on the west coast of Scotland. Let's start off by having a very quick review about what product owners are really about. This is only a summary. Please don't be disappointed if your favorite area of responsibility for a product owner is not on this list, but I've tried to summarize it as in a short amount of space as I can. So a product owner is part of the Scrum team together with the Scrum Master and the development team. We have the team inside the team concept with Scrum. They are responsible for creating and communicating a powerful vision for the product. They are accountable for the success of the product. Now, what does success mean? Well, of course, that's context dependent, but it's likely to be return on investment related. More on that later, though. They manage the product backlog. They have the final say on what stays in the product backlog and what the prioritization or ordering of the product backlog is, but they're likely to do that with a great deal of help from the development team. And a lot of that help we describe as product backlog refinement. They work together with stakeholders to determine the what and the when of the product. What features should be in there, when should it be released? And they work together with the development team to refine the product backlog. And it should be a business role. Yeah, so product owner should be the same as business owner. There are some frameworks out there that make a distinction between business owner and product owner. The intention, though, is that it really should be the person who is judged on the success of this product or this service or whatever it is you're building. So it's a business role. A common anti-pattern is not having a real product owner, but just a proxy for the real decision maker. So please avoid having product managers or commercial managers and similar roles who make the real decisions and then hand over to a Scrum product owner who's just responsible for delivery. So product owner is not a delivery manager. It's somebody who's got a real responsibility for the success of the product. In fact, the late Mike Beadle renamed the role business owner to emphasize this in his framework Enterprise Scrum. Mike was one of the authors of the manifesto, of the Agile Manifesto. So what do product owners need? Now, several years ago, I was inspired by one of the certified Scrum trainers on the trainer mailing list, summarizing it by saying product owners need vision, authority, and availability. Ideally in that order, in terms of priorities. I do apologize to the person who came up with that summary. I couldn't find the reference. But a good product owner leads the creation of a vision together with stakeholders, but ultimately the product owner needs to own and communicate the vision. A good product owner has the authority to make real decisions about the product, like features, release dates, and so on. And ideally, they have availability to work together with stakeholders and the development team. Of course, with our anti-pattern of the product owner proxy, we get the last one, the availability, but not the first two. So please try to avoid that. And that can be challenging, of course, but Scrum's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be effective at creating a better organization. So, next point is outcomes over outputs. A product owner will be judged on the success of their product, so the focus should be on outcomes rather than just outputs. For example, things like customer delight, return on investment, conversion rate. So those things rather than just story points, loads and loads of story points. That can be very tempting, of course, but it's useful to have that data so you can do empirical process control to manage expectations. You can update your reporting as a product owner on a sprint by sprint basis, but the main thing is delighting customers. So having said that, what metrics are important for product owners? I always like to go back to Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker, no longer with us, but a real business guru. And he said that the purpose of business is to create and keep a customer. Profit is the result of a radical focus on customer delight combined with disciplined execution of an empirical approach. It's not the goal, it's the result. So having something based around customer delight is crucial. For example, Net Promoter Score. So one way of measuring customer delight is Net Promoter Score. It's not the only way, but it's a very, very common way. And I think, well, in my experience, a lot of really successful product owners use that. Maybe some of you use booking.com for booking hotels, and you've probably seen that what Fred Reichelt, the inventor of Net Promoter Score, calls the ultimate question. So not the ultimate question of universal life and everything, but the ultimate question of customer delight is, how likely is it that you would recommend this product to a friend or colleague, measured from 0 to 10. And Net Promoter Score, the formula is we take the promoters, the people who answered 9 and 10, the percentage of the total that are promoters, and to subtract the detractors, the people who answered 0 to 6. And we ignore the people in between, 7s and 8s. Excuse me, just a quick sip of tea. I'd like to continue by looking at the levels of planning in typical enterprises. I work a lot with large enterprises, telcos, financial institutions in some cases. And they often have a situation that looks a bit like that. We could call that, if you like, the agile planning onion. They have strategy planning, portfolio planning, roadmap planning, release planning, and sprint planning. If they're doing Scrum, and of course most of them are. Some of them well, some of them not so well. And those levels of planning, strategy is looking at which business areas should we be active in. Portfolio, what products within those business areas should we be actually looking at investing in? Roadmap planning, which releases, a roadmap might mean that we've got a Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 major release, maybe incremental releases in between, and we're looking at the major topics in advance, not the details yet. We want to leave that open for discovering even better ideas. And typically the focus of the product backlog for an individual product is focused on a particular release. Another anti-pattern as a product owner, of course, is just stuffing everything into your product backlog and having hundreds or thousands of product backlog items. So which releases? Which features in the current release? That's the focus of release planning. And which product backlog items in the current sprint is the focus, of course, of sprint planning. Let's look briefly at, in terms of Scrum at scale, what sort of roles might be actually responsible for that. Just bear with me very briefly, please. Okay. Oops, sorry. So, of course, the development team is responsible for sprint planning. They do that in collaboration with the product owner, with a team product owner, but the development team is fundamentally deciding what comes into a sprint. Release planning is really about empirical reporting, getting data on how much the team has produced, making predictions about how much they can produce until Christmas, what the event, whether certain features are likely to be in there, and updating stakeholders with those by managing their expectations. That's going to be a team product owner typically, or it might be a chief product owner if you've got a cluster of teams working together very closely on a more complex product. And then in terms of the roadmap, you're possibly looking at a number of products, a number of looking beyond one product towards multiple releases. That's going to be a chief product owner, maybe team product owners for very small products. For portfolio and strategy, we're then getting up into the executive meta Scrum, which is, if you like, a subset, it could be of the board that's really engaged in the product owner cycle. And we might even have a chief product owner, who might be the CEO, in fact, or the chief product officer or something like that of the organization. let's look at 3 levels. Team level, chief product, or the cluster of teams, a network of teams working together. Often we call that a scrum of scrums. And also the executive meta scrum. So at the team level, a product owner is going to be looking after, what a team does, looking at help together with the team planning sprints. A lot of the work they'll be doing will be validated learning, so creating minimum viable products to test hypotheses. The chief product owner is likely to be looking at multiple teams working very closely together with the team product owners. We'll be looking a bit further ahead on the roadmap, working together with stakeholders and helping teams to coordinate. And the chief product owner, if we have that title, still just a product owner, will be looking at value streams. So independent streams of value generation, could be independent products or larger products or services that the organization has as part of its way of generating revenue. And we'll do a lot of work in terms of the organizational vision and also, of course, the organizational priorities. One of the things that a lot of organizations get wrong is trying to do too much at the same time. And one of the coaches I work with closely recently helped a major telco at a very, very senior level to use a really cool innovation game, which some of you might have heard of, called Buy a Feature, to actually start to prioritize some of those organizational priorities, to avoid having a work in progress limit that's just too high. So you end up trying to do too much at the same time, and of course the bottom line of the organization is damaged. And I want to address what is for some quite a controversial topic. Some say avoid team product owners. I say it all depends. If you do have them, they should still be real product owners. Make sure that they have everything they need to manage the success of their part of the business. So if you've got a complex collection of products, of related products, where each of those separate products can be actually delivered, can be developed further by one team, by all means have a team product owner, but make sure that they've actually got everything within their own hands to be able to make that successful. So, and whilst avoiding local only optimizations, but having a clear overall product backlog, and main thing is keep talking to each other. So the chief product owner and the team product owners need to keep talking to each other, aligning with one another to make sure that they don't miss out on any opportunities for even better results. And one example from my personal experience, one of my clients, a client with a consumer cloud-based product, had teams responsible for iOS, for Windows Desktop, Android, web, and a few other platforms. And each team had front-end and back-end capability and was able to release autonomously. The team product owners were empowered to make their part of the overall product suite successful, judged by the number of active users and return on investment. So something to do with revenue there. The team product owners and the chief product owner collaborated to maintain an overall product backlog. And the teams collaborated directly with one another through communities of practice to create alignment on user experience, architecture, end-to-end testing, and a few other things. So we were using a very, very standard approach where we did have chief product owners, we did have team product owners, we'd had one chief product owner and team product owners, and they were actually able to really bite off part of the business case and manage that effectively, whilst keeping the overall approach synchronized. So that's a very brief overview of Scrum at Scale product ownership. I want to continue by picking out something, by really focusing on something that's, I think, very critical. And the yearly Gallup survey shows that 87% of employees worldwide are not engaged in their work. Some of them hate their work, some of them are not engaged very much, they're not actively engaged, and some of them really hate, and some of them hate their work. But altogether, 87%, this was 3 years ago or so. It's slightly better now, but it's still pretty awful. And I think we need to rescue people from this situation. This is a result of scientific management, Taylorism being used for 21st century problems. Frederick Taylor's big innovation was to divide the workforce up into the thinkers and the doers. The managers, the thinkers, and the doers, the workers, just had to do what they were told and just deliver. And Scrum is not just about delivering. It's about freeing people to be engaged, to really generate personal satisfaction, and to do some of the best work of their lives. So product owners can do something about that. Scrum masters can do something about that. Managers can do something about that. Everybody can contribute to that. But I want to focus on what can product owners do to whatever level they're working within the organization to actually encourage and support increased engagement. Of course, it's a huge waste of human potential. There's, people spend a considerable amount of their life at work, so that's wasteful. But the organizations are missing out on great ideas. They're missing out on better productivity, but they're probably even more important, they're missing out on better outcomes by not taking this stuff seriously. And maximizing intrinsic motivation is the key to increasing engagement. Motivation theory shows us that there are 3 main factors that are important ones, all the basics like being paid enough and having a safe environment and so on. Not trivial things by any means, but once we've covered those hygiene factors, there are 3 science shows, as Dan Pink in his wonderful book Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us says, there are 3 factors. Other authors, the original authors of some of this work, for example, Deci and Ryan in their self-determination theory, phrase these things slightly differently, but it all boils down to the same basic points: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And purpose is the one where the product owner has really got a major part to play. So what can you do as a product owner? Well, you can involve the team in visioning. I've seen this really pay big dividends. In fact, there are some companies who say development teams are not just there to do development, they're there to actually get involved in discovery as well, in ideation and discovery. So involve the team in creating the product vision, not just other stakeholders. You can use innovation games like Product Box, Ash Maurya's Lean Canvas, Roman Pichler's Product Vision Board. There are a number of different tools out there to create a powerful vision and product strategy. You can solicit ideas from the team. In fact, there was one product owner I came across in Budapest who even allowed a certain budget of story points in every sprint where the team got to decide what features they'd like to build in. Within reason, she had veto. She had the ultimate responsibility for the success of the product, so that was important. But she really actively solicited ideas from the team and helped them to understand that it's their baby as well, not just the product owner's baby. And a few months ago, I had the pleasure of presenting another webinar on implementing Scrum at scale. And I wanted to come back to a point I said, I raised there, and that is that increasing engagement also requires leaders to invite instead of impose. They need, rather than saying, we're now going to do Scrum at scale, everybody has to jump up to the line and just do it. Invite them to do it. Use an open space meeting, and Daniel Mezek has got a great approach called open space agility to help you do that. Use self-selecting teams. Also helpful, intent-based leadership from David Marquet, who wrote this wonderful book, Turn the Ship Around. And I always find going forwards. And if I think about my career way back in the past, Linda Rising, Mary Lynn Manns' book, Fearless Change, and now they've got more Fearless Change, full of fantastic ideas on how to help people to actually change, how to introduce these type of methods. So the key thing here is make it about invitation and real choice instead of imposition. And then if we combine that with what we know about intrinsic motivation, then we've got a fantastic chance to actually get people engaged at work. So let's go to some questions. Hi.
All right, I'm back. Hello.
I was getting a little bit worried because I couldn't see you, but I'm pleased to see you.
Of course, just
I thought maybe my internet connection had dropped.
Oh, no, definitely. So I do have one question that I think is a great way for us to kick off. So one of our attendees has asked, who owns the product backlog in Scrum at Scale? And he says, isn't in Scrum, there's only one person who is the owner of the product?
Yeah, it's the product owner. Yeah, so it depends what level, you know, at the product backlog, there will be a product backlog at different levels. And I've said, you know, if we're talking about team product owners, there's an opportunity, and there's also some issues there. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure that there's a real product at the team level for that to really have its maximum use. So at any level, the product owner owns the product backlog. Mm-hmm. So the product owner at the executive meta Scrum level, sometimes we call that the chief product owner, owns the overall product strategy, if you like, or the overall strategic view of what initiatives, what's the relative prioritization of the initiatives the organization is working on. Mm-hmm. If we have a cluster of teams working on a more complex product, the chief product owner for that group of teams owns that. And if we've been able to really bite off part of the business case, so that the team product owner can really manage it, they own their part of the backlog. What I've often seen happen is simple tools like Excel. You know, we don't need these fancy tools. The next level beyond Post-its and so on is Excel or similar, or Google Sheets, whatever we like. We can have an attribute on an Excel spreadsheet which indicates currently what team is this product backlog item intended for. Mm-hmm. And if they're overloaded or if they're overloaded with some other stuff, or they've got too much to do in another area, and another team has got some available capacity, of course, there should be the ability to change that. Absolutely. So it's a sort of organizational refactoring.
Absolutely. Perfect. All right. And to lead off of that, I love this question. This is from Amanda. She says, prioritization seems to be a struggle when adopting Scrum, let alone Scrum at Scale. So how do you coach an organization to pick the number one thing to focus on?
I mean, that's really difficult. So I mentioned I mentioned a coach that I work with regularly, who'd recently had a session with senior leaders at a large telco, and what she actually did was to use by a feature. And this is something I've used in my own coaching a lot. It's an innovation game where basically you can figure out what's the available capacity we have for this next release of the organization. You know, we could call it gummy bears, or we could use a scale of gummy bears or story points or whatever we like. In advance, we have to get people to estimate the relative size of different initiatives, and then we distribute money to the senior leaders. Monopoly money is great. It doesn't have to be. It could be real money, but monopoly money is really great and costs a lot less than real money typically. And we distribute enough money so they can buy features or buy initiatives, if you like, for the available capacity. So that can be a really great way of doing that. Another way, of which I include in my training and also in my coaching when I'm guiding product owners, is to use cost of delay. So cost of delay is a rational way of talking about business value. So you can get input on things like relative incremental revenue, cost of, excuse me, cost avoidance, revenue protection, and various other factors. And you can divide the input, the cost of delay, by the duration. We've got a good proxy for duration. That's story points from the development team. And you get something called weighted shortest job first. This is built into the Scaled Agile framework, but doesn't come from them. It's a great way of prioritizing. It's a great way of having a rational conversation about business value. So I'd certainly recommend that. And of course, we also need to take risk into account. Risk is a really important factor for prioritization. And many traditional project managers have a culture of risk avoidance, and that quite often leads to the problem of the things with higher risk being tackled too late to do something about them if that risk turns into a real issue. Because of course a risk is just a probability that it will become an issue. It's not yet. So the best way is of managing that, of using that information, is to do the high value, high risk things first.
Got it.
So we need multiple factors when prioritization, and all of these things will be appropriate. I think if you go to a product or a certified product owner course from any of the major bodies who do that sort of thing, they would teach you about those sorts of approaches.
Absolutely. All right, perfect. And moving on, this is an interesting one. What do you think about organizations hiring product owners externally?
I think it's a really interesting one, and I think it's I wouldn't rule it out. I think there are some challenges there. I think there are some challenges for Scrum Masters as well, actually, because great Scrum Masters, to get things unstuck, need to have a great internal network. They don't have positional power typically, but they do need great connections. But freelance Scrum Masters can do a decent job if they're prepared to be a bit cheeky, without getting fired. I always tell Scrum Masters, main thing is be prepared to go a long way, but don't get fired. For product owners, if it's really a business role, and it should be a business role, it's, I think, more challenging. But if the organization is able to handle external people in basically as internal people, and there's no fundamental reason why that should not be the case in most countries. In some countries like Germany, it is a problem. But if you can do that, then I think it can work. But it's likely to be somebody who's got great domain knowledge. It's somebody who really lives and breathes the world of their product, or their that part of the business. So it's quite likely to be an internal person, but it could be an external person.
All right, awesome. Perfect. All right. So earlier you had mentioned how leaders might bring Scrum at Scale to their team, and how you want them to involve them in the decision to go in this direction. So I'm curious, if I am a team member and I want to pitch this to my leadership team, what would you recommend?
First thing, read Dan's book on open space agility. Buy a copy of it, give it to your boss or the boss of your boss or whoever's involved. And I think a really powerful way, something I learned from Steve Denning, somebody I've had the pleasure of working with over a few years back, is leadership storytelling. If you can tell a story about how that worked in a similar situation, so maybe another, you can borrow a story about how everybody's really excited and to really give Agile a good try, and what the results were. You can borrow that story from an organization you might be familiar with. Very often with a very carefully constructed leadership storytelling story, and I suggest if you Google for leadership storytelling, you'll find the basics on the web. But I'd certainly recommend Steve Denning's books on that. That's a great way of convincing or opening up people to the possibility to give things like that a try. So, it sounds a bit like a bit of a psycho trick, but it's not intended to be that. It's intended to be authentic, and it's just rather than trying to convince people with facts and figures, sometimes we need a more of a whole brain approach, and storytelling can really be effective for doing that.
Awesome. I like that recommendation. All right, one more. So this one is from Amanda. I've heard the PO be called a single ringable neck. I think we've all heard this before. What personality qualities in company culture can foster the PO's ability to say no?
Well, as Henrik Knieberg says, good product owners practice saying no in front of the mirror every day. I think realistically saying no is really hard, and it happens a lot that product owners aren't able to do that, and the result is a product backlog which just grows and grows and grows, and that's incredibly demotivating for some stakeholders who have got their favorite topic in the backlog. They think, wow, it's in there, I'm going to get it, and it gets pushed right to the bottom below 1,000 other things and never gets delivered. So we've got to avoid that, that's for sure. And one of the most effective ways of doing that, I think, is a couple of things, is to have that rational approach to business value. If you can show that other things are going to actually generate better results for the organization, it's hard to argue with that. That's one thing. But also by having a clear vision and strategy, that thing I was talking about with you could use Product Box and the Lean Canvas, but there are other tools as well. By having that, which says, which helps us to understand who are the users, what are their needs, what are the high-level product attributes, why is it better than why is what we're planning better than what's already there? If you're building a new CRM, why is this new CRM better than the existing CRM, or possibly better than the existing one? If it's a product for a more commercial marketplace, then why is it better than the primary competitor alternative? If a new idea comes along, we're sprinting away, we've released some stuff, we're getting some good feedback. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good, but we're making progress. New ideas start materializing. And if they are ideas which are actually aligned with that vision and strategy, fantastic, if they're going to help us to reach that strategy. But if they're going off in all sorts of directions, they might be great ideas, but not for what we're currently working on. So I think having a vision, having that powerful vision can be really effective, not only in helping to drive team engagement, but also helping product owners to say no, or to know when to say no. It doesn't actually mean that saying the no is easier. Yeah. But it means when to say no.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right, I have another one. This one is from James, and he says, when your organization is just starting the Scrum at Scale transformation, the recommended path is to establish an EAT and initial Scrum teams, and then later establish the EMS and PO as part of the organization. What advice would you give to recommend as to when and how this part of the organization is established?
So, was that the PO for the EMS, or just a PO in general?
I think PO just in general.
Okay.
But
So
I,
we want every, so we certainly need an executive action team. I would totally agree. That's really important to have at the beginning. If it's a startup with 5 people, we just need one team, so we don't need it. But in any sort of large organization, having that group of stakeholders, that group of senior leaders who understand that their job is, 1, to own the strategy for Agile, and 2, to actually remove really hard to crack organizational impediments that the Scrum teams come up with, is really important. And then we, obviously we're in parallel with that, establishing our reference implementation, and that very reference implementation needs a dev team, it needs a Scrum Master, and it needs a product owner. So we do need that product owner right at the start. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't agree that you should ignore the product owner to start with. Now, if it means, well, we can just have the EMS later, well, that might be, that's going to be context dependent. Now, as soon as we've got a few teams, maybe 5 or 6, we might then want to start having some more structure to actually keep them aligned. So I'm not sure if that really addresses the question, but I hope it's getting close.
I think it gives a good general overview. I know the beginning of the Scrum at Scale backlog, or the roadmap, excuse me, really puts an emphasis on the EAT and that initial reference model. But I could definitely see looking for a little bit more guidance after those first initial steps are in place.
Yeah, but just let's make sure we understand that initial reference model, by its very definition, includes having a product owner.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It ain't Scrum if you haven't got the 3 roles.
Perfect. All right, and then just one more. We've heard Chief Product Owner, and that is referenced in the Scrum at Scale guide, but you have used the term Chief Product Owner.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your distinction is, and if it just is context dependent and relies upon the organization.
It's completely dependent. We can use these. Let's say we've got 2 major related products, or we've got 2 major products that our company is developing, and we've got 5 teams working on each. We might have a chief product owner for each of those products, and at the executive meta Scrum level, we might call the CEO or even the organized, what would you call we might call the somebody taking care of product at board level. We might call them the chief product owner. It's just that. It's still a product owner. It's just concatenating chiefs, if you like. It gets a bit silly, but it's just a word. We don't need to, it doesn't mean anything other than a real product owner.
Got it. Perfect. All right. Well, and it looks like we came to the end of our open questions, and we're about to hit the end of the time box. Simon, do you have anything else you want to add for the attendees?
So I'll just mention that myself and my colleague, Ralph Difflip, we offer training in English and German. And our next training is next week in Bonn. A few places left if anybody wants to come. I don't want to make a major sale on that. But I think the key thing is, if you are interested in more details on Scrum at Scale, there's actually training worldwide. You can actually find out you can find out your nearest course by clicking on that link. And you can get more info from us at training@scrumcenter.com. And also, if you're interested in becoming a Scrum at Scale trainer, visit that URL, and it's a really great experience, which I went through last year in Denver, and maybe we'll see each other at a future trainer retreat, which is, I think there's another one coming up later this month in Vienna.
Yes, Yes, there definitely is. So Simon gave a lot of really good links there. And I also just want to mention that this PDF presentation, as well as the recording, is going to be sent out within 24 hours. And you can always reach out to support at Scrum at Scale if you have any questions about any of the things Simon just mentioned. And I think that is it. All right. Well, thank you, Simon, so much. And thank you to everyone for participating. It was great.
Thank you very much. Hope to meet some of you perhaps at conferences or like in the future.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you again. Bye, everyone.